Wait for it. Wait for it. And we're live. Hey, all you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans. It's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just a couple of nerdy veterans and one chaos coordinator geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies. A place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. We are the podcast that puts the fun in dysfunction. So without further ado, we're going to let our guests introduce themselves. So first we have, because we're using the alphabet, see, I can do the alphabet. Brian Thomas Schmidt, can you introduce yourself, please, sir?
You know what? Nobody's ever told me I come first in the alphabet. Usually it's my last name and I'm last. Anyway, Thomas Schmidt. I write everything from thrillers and mysteries to space opera and a little bit of romance in there every once in a while. And my best known books at the moment are probably the stuff I've done for Predator, Aliens, and Jonathan Mayberry's Joe Ledger, as well as the Larry Correia Monster Hunter International series. But I have two #1 best-selling novels, including Shortcut, which is hard sci-fi, my most recent novel, and Simon Says, in my John Simon thrillers.
All right, well, first, let's just clear this up, sir. I don't care how many times you say it, Alien versus Predator does not count as a romance novel.
You know, I hate to differ with you, man. I'm telling you. You haven't literally written sex scenes between those characters. I'm telling you.
I mean, it's classic enemies to lovers.
That's right. That's right.
Okay.
And this criticism coming from a guy who once wrote dinosaur porn just doesn't hold up with me.
Well, first off, sir, they were Yetis, not dinosaurs. So let's get it right. And it was ghostwritten, so we can't talk about that. I did sign a few NDAs, but it paid for my first edits, so we're just going to move on. All right, next we have Mr. James J.E. Pittman.
Hey, everybody. You may remember me from my Felix Chance series. That's still going. 3rd volume will be out soon. And I have a new series that I'm writing now called Pandora Squad. It is science fiction action with a dash of the military. So, we got all kinds of crazy stuff going on.
All right. Next, we have Mr. John Olson.
Hi, how you doing? I'm John M. Olson. I write primarily science fiction, but I've also written a fantasy trilogy. When you get to short stories, I'm just scattered all over the place. That's where I like to experiment. But my most recent release is in the Four Horsemen universe, Foiled Ambitions. See if I can get a good angle there. And so Mark might actually recognize that one. Yay. And I have my Polecat Protocol trilogy, which is my hard-ish science fiction series that the last book came out about a year ago.
Nice. Next, we have Mr. Mark Wandry.
Me?
Yeah, you. Unless there's another Mark working around the corner.
Only one that I'm aware of. I'm primarily known for the Four Horsemen universe. I was the original creator and then co-creator with Chris Kennedy, and ironically under Chris Kennedy Publishing. Started off with a series of 4 books, and I think we're at 87 or 88 right now. Mr. Olson falls somewhere right in that category near the end. He's a welcome addition to the crew and a spectacular addition, I might add. I've also written Zombie Apocalypse. I had a series in that. I have a series of space opera that I originally started writing with actually many years ago. First one published, I think, in 2007. And last but not least, I'm just finishing up now my first kind of techno thriller that I really haven't announced yet. So I guess I just did announce it. So,
all right.
So Chris said I was volume number 92.
Nice.
Oh, counting anthologies. Yes, absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
So the next part of the introduction, dear listener, dear viewers, how we found them. So we've met all this collection of guests through the various author spaces where we hang out, with the one exception being Mr. Pittman. He hooked up with Garber doing something degenerate at a bar, but we're not allowed to talk about that because this is a family-friendly show. So I'm just going to say, they teach us about bourbon, and that's why we like James.
Well, I just want to know why I wasn't invited. I'm just saying.
I wasn't either. I was told not to.
I don't think we had met yet, Brian.
Yeah.
I know. You know what? Let me just say, Nick, it's nice to see you back up and on your feet, buddy.
Yeah, me too. I walk like an ATST now, but other than that, I'm.
Hey, you're walking, brother. That's what matters.
Yeah. All right. Now, choice. Yeah, she's going to stab him if he doesn't.
She will.
All right, and so before we get started, we're going to do the obligatory religion questions, and we're going to start with you, Mr. John. Star Wars, Star Trek, or Firefly?
I think I'm going to have to go with Firefly on this one. I was crushed that it only lasted the one season. And I'm horrified at the thought of anyone trying to reboot it.
Okay, that's fair. And Mark, what about you? Star Wars, Star Trek, or Firefly?
Would have originally been Star Wars. That's kind of a lost cause now. Then it would have been Star Trek, which is even more of a lost cause now, with a couple of holdouts, actually. Lower Decks is pretty good. But really, Firefly is very quintessential. Once you get past flying cows in space, it's a great series.
I mean, yeah.
No, Star Wars gave us flying wells.
Star Trek was the space whales, I thought.
Yeah, and don't forget the TNG when they were flying like the space hit. That was Toss, the space hippies. Forgot about that one.
Can't forget about the space hippies.
All right, and then we have because we are polytheistic, Game of Thrones, The Wheel of Time, or Chronicles of Narnia. Mark, you get to go first this time.
Game of Thrones, the book. That's a stupid TV series. But then again, he's never going to finish the book, so it is what it is.
Okay, that's fair. And what about you, John?
Brandon Sanderson's warming up in the wings.
Well, I'm actually watching The Wheel of Time season 2 right now, and I'm not too excited about that one. So if you're talking about just the classic literature, I think I'm going to have to go Narnia.
Okay.
Yeah,
and finally, because we are civilized here on the Blasters and Blades podcast, coffee or tea, and how do you take it? Mark.
Tea, Earl Grey, hot, but with heavy whipping cream and a significant amount of Splenda mixed in with it. So I'd probably be thrown off the Enterprise for
that. What about you, John?
I think you may end up calling me a heretic, but I really have to go with cocoa instead.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm from Utah. You've got the whole religious thing, no coffee, no tea. So there you go. Cocoa is where it's at.
Nothing wrong with cocoa, especially with your weather up there.
Cocoa is allowed. Okay, good to know. So forever in Utah. We'll take notes.
Yeah, but you do need to allow for like whipped cream with sprinkles. Yeah, you have to get it done right.
Oh, he lost me at the sprinkles. The rest of it I was in for, but.
Okay. So if you want to send your hate mail to John for his selection, links are in the show notes. All right.
That's nothing compared to putting Peeps in the cocoa.
Wait, you do that?
Ooh.
Yeah, that's where the hate mail would come from. It's that one. Yeah.
You get to watch them melt, so there's a bonus in that.
Yeah, you get to watch them melt.
Marshmallows aren't big enough. You got to have a peep in there.
Wow, and I feel sane right now. Thank you, guys. I appreciate this. I feel like the normal one. This is new.
To be fair, what else are you going to do with Peeps that's worthwhile? Let's be realistic. I mean, there's not,
Throw them in the trash.
Yeah, well, there you go.
All right.
My mother-in-law gets them for me every year and lets them sit out and dry for about 2 or 3 weeks first so that they're properly cured.
Oh.
And then
they have to be crunchy.
Aged Peeps.
Yeah.
Oh. All right, we're going to move right on to the topic of hard science fiction. So first, we're going to start with the definition. And like always, to keep it simple, we grab it real quick from the wiki. Obviously, do with that source what it may, but it does link to its own notes. So we link to the wiki link. But hard science fiction is a category of science fiction characterized by a concern for scientific accuracy and logic. The term was first used in print in 1957 by P. Schuyler Miller in a review of John Campbell's Islands of Space in the November issue of Astounding Science Fiction. The complementary term soft science fiction, formed by an analogy to hard science fiction, first appeared in the late 1970s. The term is formed by analogy to the popular distinction between hard, natural, and soft social sciences in academia, although there are examples generally considered as hard science fiction, such as Isaac Asimov's Foundation series built on mathematical sociology. Science fiction critic Gary Westenfall argues that neither term is part of the rigorous taxonomy. Instead, they are approximate ways of categorizing stories that reviewers and commenters have found useful. So that is a general definition of hard sci-fi. You guys have anything you disagree with or agree with on that?
I think it's a good starting place.
I've never heard the term soft sci-fi until today, but hey, roll with the punches, right?
Soft sci-fi is kind of a all-encompassing term. I have heard the term, and I'm actually pretty much a purist when it comes to hard sci-fi. If they don't have some core scientific conceit that the story depends on, it's not science fiction. But in hard sci-fi, I like to see some real science as a core part of the story. I mean, you're always going to extrapolate. So, I mean, I think people just look at it with different. That's the problem with any genre definition is everybody's kind of got their own definition. So it's all kind of general and all encompassing of depending on what your mood is. Certain readers like certain things, and there you go.
So, is there anything you would add to that definition?
Not really, because I respect my fellow authors and their work. I'm not gonna go there.
I think it's always going to be more of a spectrum than a hard and fast. Here's this area and here's this area.
Exactly.
Okay. So, what is it you think that makes hard science people like hard science fiction?
The extrapolation and kind of having it grounded in reality. So it's like take what we have now and just like think about it, man. It's like, okay, well, what if we did this? What if this actually panned out? How would this develop? It's kind of a mental logic problem that it scratches some kind of itch for people, I think.
Well, the great joy of science fiction, I think, is the what if. The what if is a big part of why we have speculative fiction in the first place. So, but for me, there's a certain kind of grounding in reality you get when you've used real elements of some kind, whether it's science or other things that people, I think, some people in particular really connect with. So I'd have to agree with Jay on that. I think having that element and having the possibility that it could really happen adds a certain level of tension that some people really enjoy.
Yeah, I think one thing that's a differentiator is how many levels of secondary and tertiary effects you are taking into account. If you give that what if out front, what are the side effects of it and how deeply do you delve into that? And so all of this sets up a really nice environment in which you can do your typical story of you put a character in a setting with a problem. They can be based on some really deep thought on how the world is really working.
Yeah.
It's basically the ultimate rabbit hole. You start with something they can relate to, and then they just start investigating and just fall down the rabbit hole. How many people have, fallen down wiki holes or, YouTube channels where they just keep watching and expanding? Well, if you go far enough into the future with science fiction, all it is the same thing. It's that speculative process playing out over and over, iteration after iteration.
Well, that's what science is in essence. Science is exploration of these questions of what if and where will it take us.
Absolutely.
So I think that's the nice part about it as well, is looking at what, if you just went this way instead of this way, even though we know we can't go that way technically based on physics right now, what if we did? And what would happen is the basis of a good hard sci-fi story. I mean, it's, just as well as a good hard science fiction story.
Agreed.
I was talking about everything. It was beautiful, the most coherent sentence you've ever heard, and I won you. So if we start with the premise by that example of the what if being something we don't think we can do now, does that automatically disqualify it from hard science fiction because you're starting with the presupposition that the impossible is possible?
Well, I think in a lot of cases, you have to have something in the story that either we don't do now or we may never be able to do. But as you get more and more of those, you get more into the science fantasy instead. Like there's a lot of hard sci-fi out there that has some kind of faster than light travel. If you say, okay, that's my carve out exception, everything else has to obey all of the same rules that the rest of the universe does. That's why I tend to think of this more of a spectrum than anything, is because you can have those little carve outs saying, okay, let's say it's the real universe, except for this one weird thing that theoretically might be able to happen.
Right. If you go ahead.
Oh, no, it's okay. I was just going to say, I think that hard sci-fi tends to adhere more to the possible in that regard, even though you're always throwing in those elements. But I mean, look at Star Trek. Star Trek had elements of science in it, and there was some very real, interesting science, and we're living out some of that science now. Things that didn't exist that they, invented that we walk around with every day, like the communicator I'm holding in my hand, you're doing this podcast, all of those kind of things. So I think it's just a variance of degree, like John's talking about.
So if we use the example of FTL, there are mathematical formula that say it's possible. Obviously, it's an energy issue, but it's within the realm of possibility, as opposed to, I'm trying to think of something that might not qualify. Like, I don't know, using the force. Like, obviously, that takes you out of hard sci-fi. There's no scientific backing for it. Ignore the midichlorians. But FTL, we've done mathematical formula that show how you could do it. Now, there's obviously practicalities with it, or it would be just modern storytelling.
But that's where religion comes into it, in a sense, or spirituality might be a better term, because the Star Wars is a space fantasy. There's a lot of elements of the religion to the whole Jedi thing, and a spirituality, and so I think you have to take into account those elements are part of a lot of world building in many cases as well. Whether they're based on anything we know or not. And that's a different animal than science in a lot of ways, but there's similarities. Lots of theories, lots of, propositions and all of that about, what's true and what's not. Similar principles in some ways, but different.
I have a pretty complicated theory on the whole thing myself.
We've got time. Go for it.
I think all hard sci-fi tends to gravitate towards fantasy, non-hard sci-fi, and all fantasy sci-fi tries to gravitate the other direction. It's a natural outcome of either genre. You make the hardest, crunchiest science fiction you can come up with, and you have to throw a couple of MacGuffins in there and a couple of doodads to make it work right. And that temptation to start sneaking a few more things in there is almost impossible for writers and creators to resist. And it works the same way the other way. You can take the most, space wizards and everything in Star Wars, right? Yet they can't help sticking in some hard rules here and there about how things work and how things don't. Now, they went a lot less farther than others. You could argue that Trek started out as pretty hard sci-fi. They did their best. And then they had more and more, WYSIWYG moments. It's like, how does that work? Well, I don't know. Let's remove the Heisenberg compensator. That's how we'll make that work. They can't resist that. They want to do something so bad, it doesn't matter if it's completely scientifically ridiculous. They're going to do it anyway, because you want to tell the story. And all of these ones are always kind of moving in each other's directions. Now, a lot of them tend to pull back eventually, but I'm one of those weird ones. I never got into The Expanse. I had a hard time because their premise was hard science fiction, and we're going to inject blue shit in our veins so they can go faster. Really? How does that work? We all have our points, and we have hard times accepting stuff, and that's my crazy ass theory.
I don't think you're too far off there, Mark. One thing we talk about on a panel about magic in space at a con I was at. We kind of came down to the idea that it was like hard sci-fi or science fiction is kind of like the methodology and the approach you take to the subject matter. Like you can have a totally quantifiable, rigid system of magic. You have to follow these exact calculated rules and over. And that's kind of scientific. It's a scientific approach to an esoteric type phenomenon. But, it comes down to the mentality you take toward it. Are you analyzing it? Are you performing the scientific method on it, testing hypothesis after hypothesis, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't, peer review your magic spell, whatever. It just comes kind of down to a mentality sometimes. And
Larry Cree is a wonderful example of that. His hard magic series, he wrote hard fantasy.
Absolutely.
This is why I've never written fantasy, because as soon as I try to start and develop a world build, I have to try to quantify everything. How many juju beans does it take to cast a spell, all that sort of stuff. I want it all laid out, and it doesn't lend itself to that. When Larry wrote hard magic, he quantified his magical system. It's part of what actually makes it enjoyable. He pulled off practically the impossible with it, which is why I still say it's his best work. I hated to
Well,
see that.
He's using his accounting skills.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
He's good with numbers. Larry's really good at that. Yeah, I mean,
pretty much. But I think somebody dared him to write hard magic as opposed to hard science, and he friggin' did it. In reality, the MBTI world has more true magic than the hard magic world does. I mean,
I think I heard him say on the Dojo podcast that it was rooted in a very bad panel at a convention that essentially wound up in the same way. It was a dare to write a hard fantasy system.
Well, I think other than Hollywood, other than Hollywood writers, I think most of us would probably have reached that point where we realize any world building we do that there has to be an internal logic that will make sense for the reader up to a degree. There's points where you don't, but your readers will crucify you if you don't, and because the readers really get into it. Hollywood has a bit of a separation from that in the sense that with the economy that they work on, they don't care as much if people want to argue that point. But we don't work on that level. We want to be successful. We have to kind of meet certain standards. So everybody has to work in some kind of rigidness. It's just the degree, I think, that it varies.
Yeah. The Four Horsemen universe has one inviolate rule, one that's never been broken. Anybody who's written it or read it knows what that is. Now, John, you should know this. You wrote in it.
Well, I know that there's a lot of rules. We were talking about the faster than light travel thing. And that I thought was really cool because it was laid out very specifically. This is how it works. And there's this one little sort of an exception here, but you can't use that because somebody else is going to. And so there are all of these sorts of things like that I appreciate having the groundwork like that.
It's anti-gravity. There's never been and never will be. It's one thing that, because I consider it such a trope, and it's happened because of Hollywood, because it's expensive shooting zero-G. So that's why you never have it in TV and movies, generally speaking. That's why it made Gravity such an exceptional, terrible movie in some ways, but exceptional in the fact that they did zero gravity really well. That part was cool. But yeah, that was my rule. Actually, it was no zero gravity, no antimatter, and no artificial intelligence. Well, the two of them went away because if you read the stories, you see why they went away. They never really were a rule. But anti-gravity, never. I refuse.
Huh, interesting.
I think that's one of the things that really makes things into that more crunchy, hard science fiction is when you have a set of rules and say, this is how this area works. Even if it's something that you're making up completely, if you've got those nice crunchy rules, it gives you a nice framework so that you can figure out, okay, now what can I do to play with that particular feature of this world to make it part of the story?
Well,
make whatever rule you want, but don't break them, for crying out loud.
Yeah, well, some people are really good at BSing up the terminology to the point where it's like, unless you really are knowledgeable in that particular area, that you can't tell it's not real, and that's a skill I admire. And some of us are a little more fly by night on that. But yeah.
Yeah, I was reading a series where the author would interchangeably use terms that shouldn't have been, like galaxy and star system, and it made it so I had to turn off major portions of my brain to enjoy the story.
Or intergalactic and intergalactic.
Yeah.
Next, you're going to criticize how long it took them to make the Kessel Run.
They actually managed to half explain that, I have to admit, in the long run. But man, they had to twist it hard to make it happen.
How did they explain it? I don't know that I ever followed up on that one.
It was the fact that they had to travel a certain route to get there because of a high area of like black holes or something.
Yeah. There's a bunch of black holes,
and that created a distance. Yeah, that's where the space whales come from. Actually, was that they were originally established there. So so if Han did it in less than 3 parsecs, which means he cut the corners better than other people. That was their
and survived.
It was 12 parsecs.
It's about like 1.21 gigawatts. It's the same thing. They have to figure out a way to explain it at some point.
Bolt of lightning.
I think he used the DeLorean from Back to the Future secretly. He just doesn't want to tell anybody. That's at the heart of the Millennium Falcon.
Exactly. They can fly out. They can be able to fly into space too, right?
Right.
Was it? It was Lando's droid who had the charts, and then when the droid was destroyed,
they kind of kind of retconned that actually, but you know what else is new?
Yeah,
Lando also now
wider
sleeps
in.
with his droids, so what can you say?
I don't sleep with anything.
I mean, maybe he used to be a Marine. I don't know.
Maybe
I didn't see crayons on
maybe
the
he's
bridge.
That would be a crossover event. Anyway, let's move back to the family-friendly territory. So, what are the parts that you really like about hard science fiction?
It's grounded. It's a lot of people who don't do science fiction actually like hard science fiction because it's more realistic to what they can express. You have less of the fantasy aspect. You know, there's no lightsabers. There's no crazy gravity. There's no super uber power sources. You can't destroy entire planets. That kind of stuff. So it's easier to read. It's a gateway drug in some ways. Heinlein's stuff was almost all hard science fiction. You know, very hard. It was all the orbital calculations and everything.
Well,
that's where I got my teeth.
I'll give you an example. In Shortcut, which is very hard sci-fi. I had several scientists working with me on actual scientific papers to figure out where the real science was and where the line had to be when we had to go away from it. So it stayed very realistic. There's people that love that book that can't stand my John Simon books, and my John Simon books are near future books. And really, the only things I've come up with that aren't real is a humanoid robot. Everything else is, except for the flying cars, but we're almost there. And there's a lot of drones and things, and they stumble with that, even though it's otherwise a straightforward police procedural. They're like, oh, there's robots. I couldn't get into it. So I think people have their boundaries about what they can suspend disbelief over, and what's nice with some hard sci-fi is it's with near future Shortcut, because I stuck so close to NASA and all of that stuff, people can read it who wouldn't normally find it accessible, and that's what Mark's right. Some of those people really can get into it because of that.
Yeah, I think that's a key point, though, Brian, because you can do all the research in the world, and we've all done a lot of research for a particular story, but even so, you still have to make it approachable. You can't go into really high mathematical detail, or you're going to lose 99% of your audience.
Well, it depends, because Shortcut actually is a hard math book. There's very real math. It's just that it's very well explained, because I had mathematicians that would talk people through it. And those who want to read the equations, they're there. Those who don't, it's written in such a way it's very accessible for people. So you don't have a lot of it, though. The hard math is the core. Shortcut itself is a formula. It's at the core of it, but there's enough of it that people get that, oh, there's something real here. And you're right. Some people are turned off by that, but others, if you can manage to find the right balance, I think can actually get from it. And I'll tell you flat out, I don't understand a damn thing about that math. I wrote the book. I don't understand a damn thing. I had to have somebody else explain the basic math that there was like a child learning math in one scene. I was like, somebody else had to write that or tell me what to put. But it's fascinating when it works, and it's hard, it can be hard to pull off for sure.
Yeah, one of the ways I solved that problem is my trilogy, the science fiction trilogy. I have an appendix at the back of each volume of the weird things I had to look up to get the story right, to get the science to work. Like I've got a little blurb on orbital mechanics and how I got my timing right for if you gained this much altitude, your period of your rotation would change by a certain amount. So all of those details, I had the information, and so I figured, I might as well put an appendix in here. And some people have written back to me saying, hey, that's a really cool appendix. I really like that. But that's something I could never have actually put into the story in the level of detail that I had to research.
Yeah, I should have done that with Shortcut. That would have been fun.
That's a good idea.
It is a great idea.
People like a properly cited and referenced material.
What made you decide to put that in there? I don't think I've ever seen a hard sci-fi actually do that. And I read some.
I can't remember what book I was looking at, but it had an appendix that talked about something. And I thought, I'm doing some research. I might as well put that in there. So I've got things like the orbital mechanics and microgravity versus free fall, breathing perfluorocarbon. I even put in like Maslow's hierarchy of needs because there's a little bit of a psychological element to the story. So I just had a lot of fun putting the back matter together for this thing, because
It can work well. David Weber's the king of the appendices, man. He does it with all his military stuff, and his Honor Harrington in particular, and always explains all the different things and the weapons and all the different stuff, and the people are crazy for it. They love it. So yeah.
Just because he can't help himself too, but you know.
Well, that's true. He doesn't know where else to put that stuff.
That's a great way to do something like that. I mean, because you're going to make your geeks happy beyond words, and the people who are just reading the story are like, yeah, I can skip over that stuff, you know.
Yeah, well, I didn't. The only reason I actually didn't do it is because there's a movie in development, and they wanted me to do a the making of book with all the science behind it. So I was saving it all for that. But I kind of think about it now. I wish I had put some of that in there because it's very interesting. But I still have those half real, half fake science, like 30 or 40 science memos that were written for the book. That was with I mean, the guy wrote it like real memos. It was pretty cool. It's pretty cool.
Nice. All right, Nick, you had a question?
Yeah, we talked about what you liked about the genre. What do you not like about it?
The math.
Research, getting it wrong.
Okay, touche.
Yeah, one semester of algebra and I'm done. I have scientists that I email if I have real questions, and anybody who's read my space stuff knows it's actually pretty good. It's kind of sad I don't write more of it. The Four Horsemen fans aren't crazy about that. They want mechs crashing into each other. They don't want ships shooting each other. But I literally have dozens of questions I'm firing at my core group that answer questions for me. Like in my Patreon, I'm like, look, this ship's doing this and that ship's doing that, and how many G's do I have to pull to make them catch each other? And they just answer the question. So I just pop it in.
I think my big dislike is gobbledygook for the sake of gobbledygook. All right. There's a lot of people. If you're going to make up words and you're going to make up terms to lend it a sci-fi feel, fine, but make them integral to it and make them so that they make sense in context no matter where they are.
Right.
You just throw that stuff in there just to act like you know something and you think you're pulling it off. You're not. Usually you're not. But that's my pet peeve. There's people that just put that in there and it's supposed to be confusing. No, do the work, man. Make it make sense so people can understand it. Yeah, make it accessible.
Confusing is one of those things you want to avoid at all costs.
Absolutely.
You don't want people to get bored. You don't want them to get confused.
Yep. Yeah.
Those are two good commandments right there when you're writing any type of story, whether it's sci-fi, fantasy, or the funny books that I do.
All the near future stuff that's coming out for science fiction, military science fiction, hard science fiction that all link together. The military side, all of us are watching in kind of amazement and horror as we're seeing how near future's military combat is completely turning itself upside down, as you've got a bunch of weaponized autism geeks out there who's strapping bombs onto DJI drones and sending them into combat. Where we didn't think that was possible. Really, how does your platoon deal with the fact that you've got an idiot out there that has a high school education who's using a drone to bomb you at the same time? You can't jam everything because your own comms are jammed. We're entering an era of the drone Cold War practically. How do you fight?
We really are.
I don't think the Warlock system would stop that, which is what we had in 05 in Iraq to create like a protective field where if anyone was trying to, remote
multi-spectral jammer, basically, kind of an active response system. Yeah. I don't know if it will either because they're coming up with so many different ways to handle this kind of stuff, from relays to simple like commercialist frequencies, literally hopping on the back of an FM frequency that you wouldn't think about jamming. It's scary, really. You think about it.
Yeah, the possibility. It's the same thing with. That's one of the reasons that I always tell people with AI. With AI, it's the scariest part of it is that they don't have any parameters for it, and people bends the parameters. That's the scariest part for me. I think that's the same thing. I'm editing a book right now by a guy that's basically about people who decide that the way the world is going, they don't like it, so they're going to change it by sending out drone armies to assassinate people. The drones end up taking on their own control of themselves and talking to themselves and take over and then go out of control. It's kind of a fascinating. This he works for one of those top secret organizations in the government.
Yeah, so he's actually building this shit, probably. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, some of this shit, I'm like, holy shit, does that really exist? I can't really tell you, and I'm like, yeah, well, that means it does.
We're like 2 steps away from that.
We are
landmines. We got landmines that can talk to each other and deconflict enemy versus friendlies. So.
And then you toss in things like Starlink to control it all.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, we're pretty close to Judgment Day as far as like the Terminator universe. Skynet's going to go online pretty soon. It probably
that
it's going to be
escalated quickly.
It's telling that instead of the war robots, the first thing we got was the sex robots. But however, we're headed that way.
Yeah, I mean, there's a correlation between sex and violence. I mean, there's
Yeah.
Exactly.
Got to
hundreds of
take care
books
of the
written on the
soldiers
subject.
so they can go fight.
That's how
Well,
it starts. Next thing you know, they're taking up arms.
while we reel it back into the family-friendly territory, we're going to pause
Oh,
for a
I'm
minute
sorry. I'm sorry.
while we shill for the man.
Alien Days is a multi-author anthology with thrilling tales of aliens, invasions, artificial intelligence, friendship, deceit, and extinction. This combination of stories makes it a must-read for science fiction short story fans. This anthology features Nebula and Dragon Award nominees, Amazon bestsellers and award winners, alongside rising stars in the science fiction genre. Let the authors take you on adventures through dystopian worlds and far-flung planets that will stretch your imagination. Welcome to Alien Days.
All right, thank you for sticking with us through that commercial interlude. So we've talked about the good and the ugly of the genre. So Stabby, you had an idea in the comments that you sent me. So do you guys have favorite hard sci-fi movies? I mean, obviously there's the iconic Martian, but what else are you guys enjoying in that realm?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I don't watch an awful lot of movies, and so I may not be really the best to answer that.
Shows, series.
The movie Life. That's a really good example. It's extremely hard sci-fi. I mean, take the alien life out of it. That's the MacGuffin. Everything has to have a MacGuffin. The theory of taking the first actual samples that are kept intact back from Mars and studying them in space is not a bad idea. I mean, really, we don't know what to expect. Until you put boots on Mars or something that's smart enough to take proper samples. We've never had any. We've scratched the surface. We've never been below 20 centimeters. That's as deep as we've ever gone there. I mean, literally, you get into they estimate there's as much as 600 billion acre feet of water underneath the surface of Mars. I mean, they had oceans. They're still there. They're just down deep enough that they're not going to melt easily. They're not going to, subject. What the heck's the word?
Sublimate.
You see, I'm a science fiction writer, right? Yeah, I got that nailed.
Hey,
anyway,
so
all the components are there. Do we want to really take that and pop the cork here on Earth and see what crawls out of it? We just don't know. It's an interesting story that way. It kind of gets into the area of kind of some fantasy in places, especially how they portray the International Space Station. It's this glitzy wall-to-wall sealed cocoons they sleep in and all that. But it was fun, and you got to see Ryan Reynolds die horribly, so that was kind of fun.
Kill Deadpool.
Go into the same territory with The Martian, it kind of crosses over because there's bookend movie, but I think they did a lot of things very well with it.
Yep.
Yeah.
And the bad was relatively limited. One, for plot, the idea that you could have a wind on Mars enough to knock even anything over. And the other issue was the phthalates or whatever it is in the soil. They didn't properly cover it, which he did in the book, but they kind of cut out in the movie.
That's the thing about
that. Sorry, guys, I while.
Sorry about that, Mark.
That's
one of the things about that. I was actually the first editor on that book and edited it before it ever sold to Crown and did all that. One of the, the realities of he really did a good job with the science and hard science. Making it accessible was what we worked on most, and he also, the voice of the one weakness that existed that they did fix in the movies is that all the characters sounded like Mark Watney. Everybody sounded alike. And that was a problem because that voice, it's a problem and it's a benefit. The voice in that book is extremely strong. He had the voice. He nailed it. He knew what it was, and it was very compelling. However, when you've got some of the people in NASA, they fixed it in the movie, like I said. You got some of the NASA press people in there, dropping F-bombs left and right. It's like, yeah, those people aren't going to go out and do that in public. They are family friendly. That's the whole point of NASA. All these kind of things. So a lot of that, they ended up making it more accessible in the movie, and the actors brought all those elements. But yeah, he did that very well. And yeah, there were certainly some things in the movie that they they stretched more. They changed the ending. I still like the book's ending better than I like the movie's ending. But
Yeah,
that's Hollywood.
he rolled the crawler in the crater at the end. That was a big thing they cut out and stuff
Yeah,
like that. And the author,
Andy
I
Weir.
can't remember. Weir, thank you. You can tell he's such a huge NASA guy, which is kind of cool by the complete lack and missing of SpaceX anywhere in the story. Even though they were already coming up big when he wrote that, I'm like, I remember I watched the movie first time. I'm like, why not just use the Falcon Heavy? Why is that so hard about getting that up there? He's got the Delta V to put that pod in. Never mind.
Yeah, he was. But you know what? That book. The other thing about that though is that he posted it online and built a community around it before it ever came to me to be developed into something that could be printed. And then of course the print thing took off even more. So that book, that's a case of he probably wrote it and did most of that development before SpaceX really hit the scene. Things developed so fast.
That's true. He may have been working on it 20 years ago.
Exactly. I mean, that's kind of the nature of how where we are now and where we were. I mean, when I wrote Shortcut, there was only SpaceX was the only competitor to NASA. And the book just came out due to various reasons, and I'm like, man, it really feels like I really missed a bunch of stuff because I didn't mention all these other things. But I mean, that's how fast things have really changed in the space travel thing. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I would love to have that conversation. I'm completely prepped for that with Les Johnson. I got sideswiped. Help me.
Yeah, Les helped me on that book. Actually, Les was a lot of help on that book.
I'm not surprised. Les is great. He's on my contact list too. Him, Stephanie Osborne, and a few others.
Yeah.
I've really enjoyed Hugh Howey's Silo adaptation lately. I think they did a really good job with that.
Oh yeah, that's a good one too.
I also like his one of my favorite books from him is Beacon 23, The Lighthouse Keeper in Space. That I thought was really good.
I got to read that. I like lighthouses. I should read that. But yeah, I actually haven't watched the Silo yet because I need to read the series. I always like to read the series before I watch the TV show and have it ruined.
Right. Well, the adaptation it has Howie's seal of approval for accuracy, and also I think they kept the heart of it right and the details right, and it was a very well executed.
Where are they showing that one? I don't think I've heard about it.
That's on Apple.
It's on Apple TV Plus. Yeah.
Okay. Did anybody watch the movie ISS about the World War breaks out on the planet, and then now the Russian and American astronauts are fighting on the ISS?
I haven't seen that. No.
I don't know.
I mean,
when did that come out?
Modern. It came out this year, I believe. Or
where is that? Is that Netflix or where is it from?
I will track that down.
Okay. Well, he tracked that down. I'm not sure if that would count as hard SF because it's literally set now, when we the fictional war, or if that would be just modern.
That's one of those things about you. You were talking about hard sci-fi movies. I'm hard put, other than The Martian, to think of a movie that shows that kind of respect for science. It's pretty rare. I mean, there's a lot of interesting hard sci-fi ideas, but getting the science right, other than 2001: A Space Odyssey, which had some of that, but even then they went off the rails toward with some things. So it's hard because it's just not a primary concern of Hollywood when they do these things.
I'd have to verge into TV, and that would be For All Mankind, which has done a fantastic job.
For All Mankind is a fascinating kind of take on all that. Yeah.
It is, because they've tried to keep to some realistic scenarios as much as they can. And, anybody who's our age, some of our age anyway, knows that we watched, Land on the Moon, and we watched multiple trips, and then NASA just said, never mind, we're not going to do that anymore. I mean, that was kind of the American public mostly. And For All Mankind, if you haven't seen it, the whole premise is the Russians beat us to the moon. Because we took they didn't have, the one scientist didn't die, the one who was integral to their project, and the N1 was successful, and they beat us there. And all of a sudden, then the space race never really stopped. It then became a one step next. We had a lunar colony, then we went to Mars. And they've been pretty careful not to be crazy about anything. They really only barely have fusion power now. And the story, I think, is up to like 1999 for the last season. So it's pretty interesting. They try hard. The space travel looks pretty realistic. There was one scene in a couple of seasons ago where two people have to get 50 feet outside the lunar habitat without spacesuits. So they wrap their entire bodies with duct tape, and they die badly. But it works long enough for them to do what they're doing. So now there's statues of them. But it's pretty hideous scene to watch and pretty accurate too, from what I've learned about vacuum, having never directly experienced it, of course, but thank God.
I actually had to research that for something that I was doing. There's a NASA engineer who was actually on the ground, but he was in a vacuum chamber, and
Yes.
his suit lost integrity. And so he went into a hard vacuum and they rushed all the air in. And he said that the last thing he remembered was his spit boiling. So, of course, I had to use that in my story.
I've read that same account. That was a late Apollo era, wasn't it?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, it was. And, they can't just turn a valve in instant air. It took like 20 seconds to repressurize. And, like you said, he was unconscious in 5. It just did not take long at all.
Yeah. He's lucky. He was very lucky.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think his only lasting effect was his sense of taste was gone for a couple of weeks.
Oh, wow.
Only a couple of weeks? Wow.
his eardrums were blown out too, and I think he had a little bit of lung damage, but he was smart enough to exhale as it happened. He remembered his training at the last minute, and it saved his life, basically. If he tried to hold it in, it probably would have came out his nose. His lungs, I mean, not just his air.
That would be unpleasant.
Yeah, vacuum is very uncool. We're not designed for it, not at all.
His lungs are outside his nostrils. Can we put those back in somehow? Should we shove them in or what?
Not only are they outside, but they're also inside out outside of his nostrils. That's bad.
Someday I'm going to use that image in my story. I can't. That's just too colorful and gritty for me to resist. At some point, I got to find a way to use something.
You're welcome. You can send me royalties at Mark at.
Yes, you're right, Mark.
How can you tell I'm an indie? Give me some cheddar out of this, will you?
So, do you have any tropes aside from the tech side of things? Do you have any tropes that you really love to see in hard sci-fi?
In hard sci-fi specifically?
Yes.
Love to see. Realistic fusion power, pretty damn rare. It's usually the MacGuffin. It just works. It's fantastic. It's awesome. Never have any problems with it. It would be, that movie with the sleeper ship going to Alpha Centauri, and they wake up and the guy basically kind of rapes the girl. I mean,
Passenger
and all that.
Passenger.
That's it. One of the worst portrayals of fusion I've ever seen. It's right there, and there's a glass window looking right into the fusion chamber. I'm like, hold it. It's like 100 million degrees in there. How does that work exactly? You almost.
It's transparent aluminum from Scotty. Star Trek.
There you go. Oh, that explains it. No, stupid me.
The difference is they forgot to write out the formula. That's all.
Right
on the glass.
How do you know he didn't create the stuff?
They were too busy talking to the computer and it wouldn't answer. Computer.
Hello, computer.
Hello, computer. You grabbed the mouse too. Perfect.
Use the keyboard. Oh, the keyboard. How quaint.
How quaint.
Well, as long as you remember to invert the polarity of your dilithium crystals, you're good.
That's a good field trip, though. For work, I went to the Savannah River site that treats nuclear waste and turns it into glass for storage. And I was looking through a window into this big canyon that they have a crane in, all kinds of stuff where they do that processing. And the window I was looking through had 2 plates of thick glass with about a foot of oil between them. So it was actually safe to look into this irradiated environment.
The gamma rays. That's excellent.
And so it's really fun to see that kind of stuff up close and personal.
One of the things on my bucket list is to see Cheryankov radiation from a reactor operating. I just would like to see it myself someday. I'm completely fascinated by the idea. It's kind of stupid, but it's one of those things, And now, of course, after September 11th, almost all the reactors operating, you sort of can't get anywhere near anymore. So I might croak with that one on my list still.
Well, you may be able to see that at something like a small university level testing reactor. I know that a friend of mine at the University of Utah had seen the Cherenkov glow in that reactor at one time. I don't even know if they've even got the thing anymore.
Yeah, there's a low power one in Idaho. Is that the one where the very first one they ever put online is still there? It's that it was the first one to ever make power and to actually have it available. And I think it's still a research reactor there, but we're getting way off course here. So I'm surprised Mr. Handley hasn't wrapped us in yet.
No,
I'm just enjoying the conversation.
It fits within what we're talking about.
This is true.
That's what generates these ideas for writers and things like that. Just,
yeah, and the more of these cool ideas you use, the more you lean toward the hard side of science fiction.
Mm-hmm.
And it's to a point where you don't have to rely quite so much on the tropes that set an expectation in someone's head. If you can tell them up front, yeah, we're just using reality plus these couple of little things here. I think it's an easier mindset to get into than having to specify how an entire universe works.
It does. It does do your world building for you, which is kind of nice. It does your world building for you, which saves a lot of time. But also, you save that suspension of disbelief issue that we were talking about sometimes too, because all of that, it's so real. It's close enough that people just buy in. You don't have to spend as much time selling them on the concepts.
I had a conversation with somebody about something that just killed them about science fiction. Is you watch them come in, they dock their ship, and open the door, and they all climb in, and then you watch it happen on the ISS with a Dragon, and it's a 3-hour process, just getting docked and getting everything done, waiting to open the door. You can fall asleep and wake up next morning, and they're not done. And that's the reality of it. Whereas opposed to the science fiction trope, even in hard science fiction, is it takes seconds. Oh, what is dock and open the doors? It doesn't work that fast. You got to actually be kind of careful, or you end up like having your spit boil like that one guy. It's vacuum is not your friend.
Yeah, 1965 at the Johnson Space Center. That's when that accident happened.
Well, 65.
That's actually early Apollo. I thought it was late Apollo. Okay.
Yeah,
wow,
I thought it was 70s too.
That wasn't even Apollo then. That was actually Gemini. Holy crap.
So, do you guys have a favorite tech that you like to see in science, hard sci-fi?
Hard sci-fi.
Guns instead of lasers and stuff. That's always fun to see. Where they figure it out for space. You don't see it very often. They usually have to have the ray guns and everything. Well, bullets will probably still work just fine.
I like how Firefly dealt with that. They just stuck it in one of their, spacesuits.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I really like to see done well is travel time, whether you're talking bullets or light beams for lasers. You may be able to shoot something accurately that's way out there, but even if you're using a laser, if it's far enough away, it can move before your laser beam gets there. And so taking those sorts of things into account, I think is really interesting.
Yeah, I agree. I think some of whenever you can find a way to use the real aspects of that, and a lot of people say, "Oh, it kills the suspense. It needs to be instantaneous." No, what actually makes it more suspenseful is the whole twists and turns you have to make that work in your story. It's really interesting. It can take you interesting directions to make that believable that they have any suspense and all of that. It's hard. People are so used to the instant gratification we get in the movies, and the idea of somebody sitting there. Well, now I got to wait 5 hours and see if the bomb actually hits. But
yeah, it's akin to like submarine movies. When they launch the torpedoes.
Yeah,
those are probably some of the most intense scenes because they're trying to do trajectory and angle and all that. And I had to deal with this in my military days as a sniper. It's like you have to guess. You have to swag it. Your scientific wild ass guess of where that target's going to end up, even though you have the mathematics and you've already set your windage and elevation. It's still a swag to hit that target as it's moving. Because then you have to add factors you don't know for sure. Okay,
well, and
walking a foot.
I think back to War Games, which is not necessarily the most scientific as far as hard sci-fi, but the suspense of it was built around all these things happening that you never really saw on screen that were going on, and the suspense of these people watching and waiting to see what would happen and all of that, trying to figure it out. I mean, that was a big part of it. That's how those moments. I had some mission control scenes in Shortcut, for example, and the challenge was how do you keep it interesting when you're going back and forth and they're doing all that without getting buried in gobbledygook and all that. You have to come up with interesting ways to create intention of drama between the people for various reasons, and it pushes you to another level.
Well, it forces you to be more creative too, because
Exactly.
it makes me think of that scene from. And it's totally unrelated to the subject, but it just makes me think of the scene anyway. Christmas Vacation, when the head of the company is asking Clark to talk about the crunch enhancer, and he goes, in layman's terms, none of that jargon BS that nobody understands. So, like, if you keep that, and still, you can boil that down to the KISS method of anything. It's got to be believable. You can't weigh the audience down with so much gobbledygook or jargon that the audience is confused, because now we've bored them and now we've confused them.
Wait,
so you can't do that.
You can do it if you can make them think that they actually understand it, and they don't. I mean, if you're good enough at spinning it in such a way that they're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And there's total gaps because you've written around it, but it ain't that easy to do.
It is, because there's a real danger of coming off as condescending, like you're talking to a child.
Exactly.
So
Interstellar did some of that, especially when dealing around time distortion and stuff. They tackled a really difficult subject, and actually the average person went, "Oh, okay, I can understand that."
They do that all the time with their
amazing
magic.
Yeah, you have to find a way to keep it cool.
That's what I like about watching them do magic and illusions, is that they do that all the time. They sit there and explain it to you in very simple terms. What they're really doing is talking the circle so that they can pull the thing off. I mean, it's kind of part of their methodology that I really like. I mean, it's really interesting. And every time I'm like, God damn it, how come I can't figure that out?
It's all sleight of hand. It's all distraction. And we as writers do that all the time.
The visual storytellers
as I'm flipping the card with my other hand.
So you have all the great magic tricks, like, see, see, they're hooked together now.
So did that get in my nose? I don't know.
The one thing that makes it scary is the idea that some of the stuff where they take these weapons, they take these scientific ideas that are very real, and they take that next step and they create these, mega weapons. And you're like, oh, that's cool. Wait, DARPA's probably already researching that shit right now. And then it takes it to a whole new level of mind tomfoolery.
You got to think a lot of
John Ringo's Black Tide Rising series. You said medical. John Ringo's Black Tide Rising series. It's a realistic zombie virus idea. And when he came up with his idea and he ran it by somebody at the CDC, someone he had contacted, the CDC guys were friggin' horrified. They're like, why would you even talk about something like that? Because he was in a realm of possibility. It's all about dual expression, making one virus then express another virus. And it's quote unquote impossible, but they're actually working on it. It'll probably eventually get kicked. And that was a great hard science fiction example of something that his MacGuffin, his premise, is not something completely outside of the realm of possibility.
Jonathan Mayberry is really good at that with his Joe Ledger series too. Jonathan Mayberry does a lot of real science and different stuff in there. It's really fascinating and interesting. It's similar to the Monster Hunter International in some ways, except for it goes more in the science direction than Larry tends to in his, and that's what's interesting. But they both have the teams investigating these paranormal creatures, but Jonathan's are a little more techno thriller type aimed, whereas Larry's are a little more urban fantasy. So it's interesting the approach to compare the two approaches.
Brad Thor did something like that where I'm pretty sure it was Brad Thor that did it, where he combined like the rabies virus and some poison from a snake, and he gave a plausible explanation for vampirism and why the lore started. The Brad Stoker version, but just the idea like they were afraid of the water and the reflections and all of that stuff is how the lore started. I thought it was pretty interesting.
Yeah, see, I like that's one of my favorite things about when somebody can take it and science as Mark Watney would say, science the crap out of it. You take it and you think, people just have for years have been relying on the same trope with the vampires or the werewolves or the whatever, zombies, and then somebody comes on with this unique twist that actually feels like, wow, this could really happen, because really when you think about it, that's one of the things about me why I'm really picky about zombie stories. The whole idea of it is so ridiculous that if you think about it too hard, it doesn't make any sense until you get the science behind it, and then it's like, oh, well, that's interesting.
I think, like The Last of Us, did that very well.
I haven't seen that.
Zombie apocalypse.
Yeah.
Brian, I'd like
Are you
to
talking-
introduce you to my zombie series.
Nick, are you referring to the Last of Us, the movie series, or are you talking about the video game franchise?
Both.
It's the same thing, probably.
Both.
Oh.
It's based on a fungus.
That, yeah, and that happens in nature right now.
Yeah, with ants, right?
So, ants, yeah, and now I guess there's something that's affecting deer.
Oh, the zombie deer. Yeah,
The
I've
zombie
seen-
deer.
Yeah, there's some
I'm
kind of.
glad I
there's-
live in this age now because this shit's
Ants,
weird.
spiders.
Yeah, there's some real zombie stuff that I've been seeing that is kind of interesting. That's kind of basically that effect. But yeah.
Bath
Yeah.
salts.
Bath salts.
In a steamy room, you got to mix the two.
Don't worry, because if you run fast enough, their legs will fall apart, and then they won't be able to catch you. So you can still get away.
It's like when I read World War Z. It's like they when I was reading the accounts, I'm like, okay, so you can't generate your own heat, therefore you can't move. Once you get too cold, everything will lock up. Why doesn't everybody just go north where it's snowing? And that's what ended up happening in those accounts of World War Z. I was like, man, why didn't they just? This book should have been like 3 pages. Yeah, we noticed the problem, then we went north. The end.
Yeah.
But then you wouldn't have the book. Just like you couldn't have Lord of the Rings if they just rode the birds in the beginning.
Yeah, just get on the Eagles and just drop it in. Kobe.
Yeah, I mean that's where if you do it well, like E.T.
Eagle up
for
a bird.
example. E.T., a movie that I remember loving as a kid, but it totally falls apart when you think about the fact, okay, if he could fly at the end, why didn't he fly at the beginning? Whole thing falls apart. But the way they did it was so brilliant that by introducing that at the end, you don't go back and think about it because you're so moved by you're so in love with E.T. at that point. And that's the genius of the writing of that story.
No, you're absolutely right. There's a little bit of hand waving going on there, and we didn't care.
We didn't care at that
built it
point.
to the point
At that point, you don't care because you're just, oh, thank God E.T. lived.
Oh, I remember bawling like a baby at the end
Oh
of that
yeah,
movie.
when E.T. died. Oh my God.
I remember crying at the end of E.T. and then bawling when I saw Gremlins, which I was way too young to have seen Gremlins, but my parents were like, "Oh, it's got these little Ewok things."
I'm outside spreading Reese's Pieces randomly in the yard, hoping to attract an alien and go out and check on them. You know.
All I had was Skittles. I did the best I could. I'm like, I hope they like fruit.
Way to spoil a 40-year-old movie, Nick.
My mom's like, hey,
It's been 40
what are you doing with
years.
those
If you haven't
Reese's
seen
Pieces?
that,
You're going through them
I don't
awful
know where
fast.
you've been. Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about the good, the bad, and the ugly, in the wide sort of world of hard sci-fi. There's definitely room to drill down to specific subcategories, the different tech that's out there, the mega structures and all that. But clearly, at some point in time, if you take enough presumptions, if this, then this, then this, there's a line where at a certain point in time, you're no longer hard sci-fi. So where do you guys see that line as?
Well, I got accused with my book of having the hard sci-fi side, and then I have the other stuff that's a lot more fluffy. And so I think I'm kind of in that middle ground that you're talking about, where it's kind of hard to tell. Yeah, you've got some things in there that are more the fantastic stuff, and then you've got the hard sci-fi. Okay, it's just a matter of how you present it and how you mix it and what you can get away with on that.
Yeah, here's a good example. It's not the best hard sci-fi in a literal sense, but Interstellar. All right, I could buy into that story until the third act, and that's where he went off. That's when it went off the rails because they got into all this mystical crap, and it was like a completely different movie. I think if you're at a certain point where everything still makes sense and you're tied into it, you can afford to kind of go there as long as it feels natural to where you are. But if you go off a complete cliff and it takes a complete turn, that's where you lose everybody.
Yeah, I think that line is you need to have the space opera sort of an element in there as a background the whole time to balance that. So it isn't that big switch like you were saying.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, the only premise they ever dropped about it was they mentioned one thing. The only thing that can go backwards in time is gravity. And I'm like, when did they write that law? I think I missed something.
Yeah, I don't remember that in the laws of physics.
No, I think they skipped over that one. I think I missed that in 8th grade or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's some pitfalls in there because yeah, hard sci-fi. You want to use the scientific method, come up with your premise, your theory, hypothesis, and you start doing your field work and all that stuff. But when it gets to the point where it feels like you're writing a technical manual or a textbook, I think that's where you're going to lose people. And I think
Well,
that
it's true, but also
you
if
got to have a little wiggle room in the hard part of hard sci-fi.
sure you do, but I think there's ways to take a real scientific conceit and make it a through line for the story that connects into what you're doing, that makes it still feel grounded in the real, even when you're completely off the reservation. And I think that's a trick that you can do is you use enough real stuff that it's tied into something. People don't mind because they love
Yeah,
the what if. They love the what if. That's
The
why we
a
all
great example of
most of
that.
us
that
came to
that's the
sci-fi for
best
that
part of our
anyway.
species. That's the best
Yeah,
part of being a human being. The what if. We love the mystery. We
exactly.
love
That great
the
aspect of for
imagination part.
a hard sci-fi series would be the 2001 universe. There's 4 books that were written in it, and they're all credible attempts to do as much hard science fiction as possible, especially considering how old the original one was. And each book progressively continues to be hard science fiction, but with more and more super tech built into it as it goes down the road.
Yeah.
By the time
Yeah.
you get to the last one, you're more than 200 years into the future. And the premise of it is they find the astronaut that was thrown into space by Hal and revive him, like after being floating in space for hundreds of years. So you obviously have an awful lot of anything that looks like fantasy to us, but they approach it from the angle of any sufficiently advanced society, appears as magic to a less advanced society. So it's
Yeah.
still hard science fiction, but anybody who picked up that book would probably call it more like space opera by the way it
Yeah.
appears.
Yeah, but I love one of my favorite things is when I hear somebody like some general public saying, "Oh, I hate that sci-fi crap." I love to ask them, "Okay, well, what are your favorite movies?" And they always name a sci-fi film because there are
Oh
Yeah,
there's so many big sci-fi films. They don't hate sci-fi. There's certain things that they don't like, but it's just one of my favorite ways to kind of disprove that theory. When people, I hate that sci-fi stuff. Well, no, you don't. You love all the movies.
and
well,
the
it's
TV shows.
Exactly.
we're big fans of the Alien franchise, which make you happy, Brian. So we watched everyone outside of just the Alien movies, and then we're here with a pad and paper, like, okay, chronologically, where does this fit into the timeline? How does this work? And we're like
Oh,
little amateur scientists over here doing that. We drive ourselves batshit. It's like,
I was
oh
gonna
wait, now
say
we're going back years.
with Alien, you'll really drive yourself batshit because there was nobody. That's the one thing advantage you have with Star Trek and Star Wars is somebody was there keeping track of that stuff to do that
Well,
world
except the
building.
last 3
With
Star
with
Wars movies,
with
but we won't
with
talk about those.
Fox, with Alien and Predator, they were just trying to like, oh, we got to compete with another franchise to get up in this thing, and they were throwing it out there, and then they didn't keep a gatekeeper involved, so things got
Yeah,
mixed up. I've spent a
How do
lot
we
of
put this
time
in
when
the
I
same
do those
universe?
books.
Put Lance Henriksen in it.
right.
Yeah, exactly. I try to do a lot with the short story books of trying to find ways we could plug some of those holes to at least like add some plausibility to it. But yeah, some of it's a lost cause.
Yeah, except for the comic book Predator Cold War, which was amazing.
But
Earth
that's
Wars
why
was
they
good
have a.
too.
I mean, I don't know if you know this, but AVP is a completely different universe from Aliens and from Predator. Okay,
Yeah.
and there's certain timelines. There's so many separations now because they just can't make it work any other way. So
One of my favorite shirts as a kid was the Wayland Yutani Group T-shirt.
Yeah.
I wore that thing until I got too big to wear it, and I still
I was a
tried to make
teenager.
it.
I had a Nostromo hat at some point. I lost it during a move. It really kills me because it was a limited edition. But
yes, like my hand solo blaster.
I ended up having I had one from the '80s, and then I don't know what happened to it. I grew up, it got sold. Probably my mom got rid of it or whatever. Ended up
yeah,
finding
that happens.
the
Heretics,
remake
those
where
parents.
it was like, yeah, the remake that was like orange and white. So I was like, oh, okay, I'm going to use my modeling painting skills here. I'm going to weather it up and all that. It still makes the old cannon noise, like choo choo choo.
Yeah, mine doesn't make the noise, but I did buy one. I did buy one years later. But yeah, what happened to mine is the worst nightmare story. Nothing to do with hard sci-fi, but I was being a silly kid, and we were checking in for a flight, and they said, "Do you have anything we should be aware of or dangerous?" Or whatever. Well, I have this. I pull out my hand solo blaster, which I was carrying on the plane. Oh, you can't take that on the plane, and I believed them. And then by the time somebody in my family came back to get it, it was gone. So somebody at the airline
Yeah.
stole it.
somebody gave it to their child. They couldn't find it on the shelf.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Like
you've
when
been,
Customs Border Protection seizes your beer, they destroy it one at a time while watching a movie.
Yeah.
So James,
No,
you've been a little bit
taken out-
quiet. So what do you have to say on the subject?
So, going back to what Mark was alluding to with Clarke's third law, I love kind of blending the hard sci-fi with kind of the esoteric stuff. So, for instance, in the story I got in Villains Arise, I deep dove into all the Apollo program and everything Artemis was doing and all SpaceX and everything. And then I threw in like some semi-plausible aliens actually on the moon. So I love just kind of that, taking that same mindset and applying it to the less, the more fantastical, less scientific, more advanced type, indistinguishable from magic, but here's a couple of things that might make it plausible. I love playing with that, and I love movies that play with that too. So, going like to The Expanse or, Firefly, when you get to the Serenity and the Origin of the Reavers and stuff like that. That's always fun to me. I like taking it like even a further one step sideways in reality a little bit. That's always fun.
Okay. That could be interesting. Have you ever, when you're writing, added your own laws to science that you posit as the next step in your speculation?
Oh my God, yes.
Yes.
All the time.
Yes. Or robotic laws for that matter. I've added
We
a
are
bunch
gods
of
of our own universe.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
What about you, John?
Yeah, it's like, how exactly does that travel through space work? I like the idea of having difficulties and consequences and penalties with the tech. Even if you're making something up, that's one of the things that helps make that more believable. Now, the world kind of imposes those penalties on us, like, well, I don't believe in gravity. Well, yeah, jump off a building and you might become a believer really quick. That sort of thing. So there are these consequences out there. And so when we make up those aspects in a hard science fiction story, having those penalties and difficulties built into it, I think makes it a lot more believable and is easier to weave in without having to explain, well, yeah, you just jump in your ship and poof, you're at this other planet. I like having those challenges and difficulties because it gives more to build a story around.
I think what's fun about digging into the science, for example, in Shortcut, the conceit was we don't want to have any FTL in this thing. We want it to be real space travel. So we went to the science experts and said, okay, find me a way to do something like FTL without doing FTL. And they used quantum entanglement and this thing called polaritons, which are real and really being studied. And they said, if you extrapolate what the possibilities point to for this, you could literally take a physical body and replace it with another physical body in space and move things across space faster. And that's what the conceit of the whole book ended up being, is what a shortcut is. You take an empty parcel of space, then you take the ship and everything in it, and you jump it over there, and you bring the empty space back to where it left. And it created this whole possibility of getting to Mars in hours or days instead of years, and all of these kind of things. It's fun when you play with that science. You get the chance to look at what might be in ways that feel closer to reality, and it's fun to play with.
Do you ever worry?
Foster may also something like that.
Was that?
Alan Dean Foster had his KT drive, I think it was. It was basically
Yes.
a projected gravity field. So you'd project this field in front of you, a foot in front of you, and blink it. So it's like the classical having the carrot in front of the horse and makes the horse go forward. The ship would be drawn towards gravity faster and faster and faster and faster. And it's a pretty novel idea. If you can project a gravity field, it would work quite well. And he even had at one point where they built them on a planet and they couldn't turn them on. And one story was these terrorists turned one on a planet. They basically tore a hunk out of the planet. These things, they were so dangerous. But that was one of
That's one of my favorite things about
Go
Alan is that he writes all these tie-ins that everybody knows and all this stuff, and so He writes a lot of stuff what people would call the soft science fiction, or the stuff that doesn't really lean towards the plausibility. But when you read his original stuff, man, he's really grounded in science and all this stuff, and he writes some really interesting stuff with
Oh,
that.
the whole Flink series are all great stuff. Ice Rigger,
Oh
more
yeah,
great stuff. He likes writing pretty crunchy hard science fiction, actually.
he really does, and he does a really good job. Did you read the Quad Rail series? I love that Quad Rail series. It's a great kind of a large detective with a really interesting kind of space elevator kind of concept at the middle of it.
He's one of the few authors that if he published his shopping list, I'd probably read it. He really knows his trade.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we have run out of time. There's clearly more to talk about this topic, so we're going to do some follow-on episodes that we will drill down. We have some scientists that are going to come on and get nerdy with us that had to reschedule today, so we'll definitely be back to this topic. But before we let you go, we're going to give everyone who's here today a chance to talk about what they're writing and how people can find them. So we're going to start with you, James, because you're in the Brady Bunch corner.
So my newest series dropping in April is called Pandora Squad, as you see off my shoulder here. It is kind of an action sci-fi. I took a hard sci-fi premise and really just kind of went wild with it. So it's basically Dirty Dozen meets Stargate SG-1. And then I, had to come up with really fun deviations to the laws of reality to make some things work, including quantum metaphysics, which kind of relies on quantum entanglement and brain hacking. So that's my newest series coming out in April, and that's kind of what I've been really pushing hard on.
Cool.
Reminds me of that meme where you see the guy that played Iron Man, and it's like, when did you become an astrophysicist? Last night.
Last night.
You mean Robert Downey Jr.?
Yeah, there we go.
That guy.
That guy.
That guy.
That unknown guy who played Iron Man.
Just that guy who made the entire Marvel franchise work,
Right. Not only that, but I included your zombie ants in the form of zombie spiders, and the whole nature documentary about the tarantula hawk wasps that parasitic and lay their eggs in giant spiders. And they fight giant reanimated spider husks. Thank you, Cornell's scientific program trying to make nanotech using dead spider husks. I just made them the size of VWs, so because that was fun.
Okay, who needs sleep? All right, John. James, where can they find you on the internet?
You can find me on my website, halfacrepond.com, or on the Instagram at j.e.pittman, or on the Facebooks at J.E. Pittman Writes.
And all of that will be in the show notes. All right, what about you, John? What are you working on right now?
Actually, I have just finished up a project. I'm looking at another project. I'm going to grab a couple of friends and tag team Hillbilly this weekend and talk to him about a possible trilogy. So I'm having a lot of fun kicking ideas around for that. It's going to be a new science fiction thing in a game property. It's a lot of fun writing in established universes, kind of like what I did with the Four Horsemen. It's really cool to have these other playgrounds to do stuff in. So I'm going to be trying to figure out which direction I'm going, whether it's going to be another self-published thing or if I'm going to do a trilogy with him or some other interesting project. So right now is a big crossroads for me. But you can find me. My blog is johnmolson.blogspot.com. If you search for me on Facebook, that M in the middle of my name is important because there's like a billion John Olsons out there. But if you put the M in the middle, it's a lot easier to find me. Lots of social media, Twitter, Facebook are probably the easiest to locate me on.
So you said you're writing for Hillbilly. That's Three Ravens. So are we talking Starflight, their universe they have the IP for, or Steve Jackson's Car Wars?
Oh, this is Starflight that I was going to talk to him about. A friend of mine that I work with for the day job is doing some of the Car Wars stuff, and that's they're having a lot of fun with that too.
Nice. So what about you, Brian? Where can listeners find you, and what are you working on right now?
Well, BrianThomasSchmidt.net, BRYAN. And, pretty much Brian Thomas S on most of the social media, or Brian Thomas Schmidt, which is Instagram and TikTok. What I'm working on right now, I'm actually at a crossroads like John. I'm actually working on my first noir thriller. It's kind of there's no sci-fi, no speculative stuff. It's set in the Philippines, based on my experiences there. I'm engaged to a Filipino, and they're actually coming here in 44 days to get married and live here. So based on all of that stuff, so that's a lot of fun. And then I'm going to write the next John Simon thriller and get that out, book 4, and then I'm going to write a sequel to Shortcut. So I've got a plate lined up.
Sleep? Who needs it?
Yeah, right. No, I love what I do, so it doesn't. Who needs sleep?
Okay. All right, Mark, what are you working on, and how can they find you? And as usual, dear listener, everything will be in the show notes.
Well, you can get me at www.worldmaker, one word, worldmaker.us. That's my main website. My blog's available there too. I'm doing a lot less than I used to on Facebook. It's easier just to post to a blog and then, copy it off that way. But you can find me on Facebook as Mark Wandry Author. My Patreon page is at patreon.com/Mark H. Wandry. I'm not sure how I got the middle initial in there, but it's there anyway. Right now, I'm working on finishing up that new book I told you about. It's actually going to be part of a trilogy, and it's called the first time anybody said to anybody. So on you, Brian. It is called the Umbra Code, and the first book is 0 Day, and it's just about finished. And my blog followers, actually, if you're Patreon, have been enjoying free chapters. I've been writing that. Anything I write that's not shared with somebody else, I'll be posting all individual chapters as stuff comes out, so you get free previews. It may not look quite like
Awesome.
it does when I write it when it's finished because I'm a pantser, so things can get really wild and really fun. Beyond that, I have the next Four Horsemen book will be the what was it? Ashes of Empire Ashes of Republic. It'll be the last book in the Phoenix Initiative series before the next one begins. The role-playing game is almost done. Four Horsemen role-playing game, Rules of Engagement. John Osborne is finishing that up right now. A book is coming out in concert with that called Caveat Emptor. That is a fan-inspired book. We had part of the Kickstarter was to come up with an idea for a book, so we wrote that book together. And then I also have another space series kind of IP that I'm working on, kind of life after the Four Horsemen universe thing. But that's still a few years away, so no announcement on that one. So again, why sleep? It's overrated.
What was the name of that thriller you were talking? You were talking about something earlier. What was the name of that?
That's the Umbra Code. That's going to be it's a techno thriller with aspects of like societal collapse mixed in. So there's a lot going on. I'd probably call that fairly hard science fiction, but it's really near future. So it doesn't get too deep into the woods with that. Yep, that'll be. I'm going to be looking for how I'm going to publish that. I haven't decided yet. Self-publish. I might talk to Hillbilly about it. It won't be Chris with them, and that's nothing to do with Chris. It's just that he doesn't do that sort of. He doesn't have an imprint for that, so I'm going to farm it around, see what I decide.
Awesome.
Nice. And this is the part, dear listener, where I remind you if there was anything you wanted us to cover when we come back for that second episode, because we're going to be planning that, just hit us up in the comments or use any of our social medias and you can find us. And do remember to please be kind and speak your mind on the reviewing platforms. Your reviews help the right readers find the right book, and it really does make a difference to new authors out there for you to leave reviews. It's social proof for other people that might be thinking about it and on the fence. So if you like authors and you like their stuff and you want them to write more of it, reviews can make a difference, especially when a publisher is trying to decide if they're going to green light the next book in the volume or the next trilogy or whatever. Like, your engagement helps them. So if you wait, sometimes you miss out. With that being said, you can find us on our Linktree, linktr.ee, Linktree/Blasters and Blades Podcast. Again, Linktree/Blasters and Blades Podcast, where we link to all the things, the bit shoots, the rumbles, the YouTubes, the Twitters, our email, blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com, for professional purposes only. Or you can find our Facebook group and our new Facebook page over on the Linktree. And most importantly, for the non-professional emails, you can contact Madam Stabby Stab on her Instagram, Twitter, or emails. She wants all the hate mail. So far, no one's been brave enough, but one of these days, you will gird your loins and do it. I have faith that you are going to make her cry, or she'll make you cry. I'm not sure how that's going to work, but be brave, people. Be brave. And with that, you can find us on our website, anchor.fm/blasters-and-blades. Again, anchor.fm/blasters-and-blades, where for as little as 99 cents a month, you can help keep the lights on. These episodes are not free to produce, and every little bit helps. Or you could support the show more directly at buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Again, buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Be sure to put in the comment section that it's for the podcast, and I will keep my co-hosts duly caffeinated. They will drink until the coffee brand coffee runs out of stock. So, yeah. So what are you enjoying as you're packing to move? I know you're not sleeping as much, Stabby, now that you're packing.
Now that you're packing.
I was packing while we were doing this podcast. My desk. So if you kept seeing me look down, I've been dreading packing my desk. And so I figured since I'm sitting here, I put a box right here next to me, and I've just slowly been just dropping things in the box because it needs to be done. But what I am drinking out of my beautiful mermaid Starbucks cup is a White Claw.
Yeah, they don't
That's
sell
how
that at
packing
Coffee
is
Brand
going.
But if you do want to go to Coffee Brand Coffee, our affiliate sponsor, and use the code podcast Grunt, links are in the comments. We do get a little bit of a kickback. It does help fund. So far through that affiliate program, we're up to 6 episodes paid for as we broke it down. So that's a winner. And with that
They
being
have hot
said,
cocoa too.
yeah, my mom's been enjoying their marshmallow hot cocoa. She's been going nuts for it. I'm probably gonna have to buy her more. Why did I end up having to be the one to pay for it? I don't know. Somehow that
They have
happened.
hot cocoa. They have coffee. They have tea. They have cold brew bags if you like cold brew coffee. But they also have saltwater taffy and chocolate covered espresso beans.
Oh my goodness. They got it. They even got stuff for John. I mean, they got the cocoa. He's set.
Yeah.
All right.
Caffeinated cocoa?
Did you put espresso in? Well, if you put espresso in cocoa, that's just a mocha.
Yes.
What's wrong? What's wrong with that?
Just drop the chocolate
nothing.
covered espresso bean in there, and you got the same effect, probably.
There you go. All right. Thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. For my crazy co-host, I am J.R. Hanley, and this was the Blasters and Blades podcast. We'll be back next week at the same time where we'll indulge our love of nerd culture, cheesy jokes, and all things that go boom. And speaking of hard science fiction, there is one line that you probably shouldn't cross. There is a scientist who decided for the heck of it to see if he could turn Mountain Dew into wine. So he is brewing a Mountain Dew wine and tracking the journey. Yeah, he's tracking the journey over there on the Facebook. So it reminds me of that line from Jurassic Park. They spent so much time seeing if they could do it. They never asked themselves if they should.
Life finds a way.
Life finds a way. All right. Thank you guys for coming. This was fun. And I'm serious. We're going to have to schedule a second one. Les Johnson was not pleased that he had to reschedule, but life happens. And we'd like him back too for this. So, all right. You guys have a wonderful evening.
You too. Guys.